Well, I made it. Didn't die, did I? Not yet. I pass every car on the freeway. I'm very naughty. Right? Well, I know. I think I've got, how do you work out what points you've got in your license? I know I've got quite a few. No one tells me. How do I learn to know? What do you have to go online? Hey? You can't check in advance how many points you've got? Huh? But what do you mean the notice? Oh no, see that usually goes to the owner of the car, and the car, even though it's mine, it's not in my name. So they wouldn't have my license on that one. So how do I learn about what I mean, I might have too many points. Can I ask them? Huh? Gets a ticket? No. Then they do a little affidavit or a little stat deck, and then I get the points. I'm scared to look. I've never received any letters. Ever. Hey? I do have. I've got a proper address in Sydney. My license is based on that address, and so they check up on me. Okay. Very polite of them. I've never met him yet. Maybe when the policeman stops me, he'll discover. We'll see. No, that's right. I'm a licensed driver. Oh. We'll pray I don't get caught. Because when I'm in the States, I use my California license. I really lost that one as well with so much speed. And then I used to use the California license here, which is very good because when I get caught, they can't do anything with you. But because my California license ran out, I had to get an Australian license, and now I'm on the records here. So very poor. Cheers. Okay. So, okay, any discussion, any points, anything to bring up from your contemplation, from your meditation, from the discussion group, from this morning's teaching? Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right. Yes, that's right. Yes. Everything's forgiven, yeah. Well, because first of all, I suppose because the guy next door, do you know the story she's talking about? I always quote the story. She must have read it in the teaching somewhere. But this is about the bodhicitta teachings where you take the blame, where you learn to take the blame, you know. And so this is a friend of mine, a bunch of Buddhists, having a party in Sydney. John is the guy. I can't think of his name, but let's call him John. And he was his house, and he was telling everyone how his brand new BMW got scratched, like the length of the door. Then he fixed it and didn't complain. Then it happened again, so getting a bit serious. And he discovered it was the old bloke next door. Lord knows why, but obviously this old bloke thought he had done something wrong. Obviously assumed that John had been naughty, and so he scratched his car. Whatever he thought he did, he never said. So the point is, John said, kind of joking, well, what will I do about it? Someone said, oh, well, I'll scratch his car, I'll sue him. Then George, one of our friends, said, I'll tell you what Mum and Dad would do. He would discover what this old bloke liked, and then give him a beautiful gift and apologise. Sounds peculiar, right? And John thought that's a great idea. So, okay, the background there, obviously, and this is probably the answer to the point. This old fellow was convinced John had done something wrong. So there he is in his own ridiculous way, scratching his brand new BMW. God knows what he thought John did. But often this is what happens. This is to do with karma. You know yourself when you get blamed for something you didn't do. You get accused. You didn't do it. And everybody utterly believes you do. That's the way karma works. But there's some strong karma from the past due to having blamed or accused. So in this life, even though you're innocent, you are seen as bad. I think of that girl, that Amanda Knox. I know whether it seems to me she's innocent. I don't know. You read her story, you read the boyfriend. It just seems to me, and these people with their projections about this wicked Italian, all the Italian coppers, on this American girl, and the conviction in everybody's mind that she's this evil monster, evil. The parents of the girl that she was supposed to murder utterly believe she's been a super famous case. Have you followed? You've noticed it? And then everybody's convinced. Millions of people are convinced she's this evil monster. That's how karma is. when you've done nothing wrong in this life. This is why the only answer to it is why, to the question why me. This is, I mean, at least for me, karma gives the answer. Like there's those young Tibetan nuns being accused of something and then tortured and literally abused for doing nothing. It's the same kind of thing. If there isn't an answer, if you are okay, before I finish the John story, if you think of this, if your mother did make you, then, meaning if there was nothing of Robina existing until the second that you began in the womb, then it really is true there is no reason why things happen. Do you see what I'm saying? There is no logical reason why I should get accused or abused or my BMW scratched or whatever if I didn't do anything wrong in this life. It really is random. It really is not fair. Even if you're a Christian, you can accept it as God's will. That's an answer. But the materialist view doesn't have an answer. So no wonder we all go crazy. Are you seeing what I'm saying? No wonder we go crazy. You just have to accept that this is life. It's random and there is no logic to it. Well, it's kind of a bit depressing to think that's how things are. Because then you can never, ever, ever guarantee you won't continue to suffer. There's no way out. So then Buddha's explanation, as we know, is the karmic one. Well, at least as far as I'm concerned, that's at least a reasonable, coherent explanation, and I'm prepared to keep working with that one until I discover he's wrong. Good enough. So anyway, there's a story, the John story. He liked this idea. So he found out this old bloke liked golf and bought him very beautiful golf balls, wrapped them beautifully, went to his back door, knocked on the door, and the old bloke's completely gobsmacked, of course. He offers him his beautiful gift, and he sincerely apologised for whatever he's done wrong. As far as he's concerned, he's done nothing wrong, but he apologised. The old bloke took the gift, and then John's sitting in the kitchen having a cup of tea, feeling like very good. And this old bloke comes in, beaming from ear to ear, so happy with his gift unwrapped. This is the kindest thing anyone has done, he said. Then he said to John, and everything is forgiven. So you don't look what happens if you don't do that. 27 years later, you've got searchlights on each other, you're suing each other in the local courts. You hear these stories of neighbours, how they do these terrible things to each other and never give up, It's like war. And all he did was apologise. You've got to be brave to do that, don't you? When you didn't do it. It's even hard to apologise when you did do something wrong. But when you didn't do anything wrong, oh my God. Yeah, a friend of mine, this sounds even more shocking. One of the other students in California, and she'd been sort of, not terribly, but sort of vaguely abused by her stepfather. And she was going through therapy and agonising over trying to get past it, trying to get an explanation. So she first meets Vajrasattva, and he's, Rinpoche style, long, detailed description, and then told her that she should write a letter to her parents and apologise. Well, she thought Rinpoche didn't hear it properly, so she proceeded to tell him the entire story again, And she said it took her about 10 years to finally be able to, didn't understand it, but finally did this, and then she in her heart felt different. It was pretty. This is the Mahayana. This is Bodhisattva level. This is kind of super. This is sort of university level. Excuse me, heavy duty. It's interesting, isn't it? A who? Offered him the gift. Well done. Well, and the thing is, you did do something wrong. You stole his lemons. So you should give him a gift. You were actually wrong. So, but you still apologise. That's good. Anyway, anybody questions? Any more points that have come up throughout the day? Yes. Oh, I see. Okay. Kind of petered out there. Okay, so let's talk about it, shall we? There's no particular question for the discussion, just what it means, really.
Looking out things like
You're losing me now.
I know.
So let's go. Go on. What else?
Like a magnetic connection
between what and what? What do you mean?
Well, I'm going to talk about the way
It's a very big statement. You've got to know what you mean by it. You've got to state your case really there. So what do you mean by it if you say it?
Oh, nature. People's nature. Environment around how obviously not a physical nature, it's more like that.
Okay, let me just explain the way we saw. I think I might have said it briefly before. Using this model of the external physical world being made up of the four elements, which is the same as the Galileo and our mob back in the Middle Ages would use this model, but now we talk about 4 million different elements, isn't it? So this model is there is the physical world, which is made of the four elements, and then there's mental, there's mind. There's two types of phenomena. There's minds, right? Consciousnesses, beings, trillions and trillions and trillions of consciousnesses, and then there are the four elements. Okay? So, because in this Tantric model, where they had this description, which is the same model they used in the Tibetan medical way of describing illnesses and things, there's this very I mentioned this in relation to the Kala Chakra Tantra. There's this inextricable, intimate relationship between minds and matter. So, what's your name? John, okay. So John, here we have this person called John, and according to this model, there's gross consciousness inextricably linked to gross physical energy, in this case, the physical body of the human being, the elements, and the earth element, the water element, the fire, the air, the four elements all conjoined, and your consciousness is conjoined with this. So at the gross level, your gross consciousness, which is conceptuality, sensory, is utterly linked to that gross physicality. And if there's a bit of gross physicality missing, then the consciousness can't function. They're intimately linked. So if your eyeballs aren't there, you can't have eye consciousness. If there's no ear business, you can't have ear consciousness. You with me? Okay. So that's your gross level. Now that's what we think we are in the West. That's it. So when you stop breathing, you're ready for the body bag as far as the West is concerned, but you're not dead yet. Your gross level has ceased, the gross physicality, the gross mental, and you've gone down now to the subtle consciousness. And this too is inextricably linked to a subtler level of physicality. And that's the subtle physical, like the same they talk in yoga and the Tibetan medical system. You've got the subtle wind energies, the subtle wind coursing through this subtle nervous system, which has got 72,000 subtle channels. And then your consciousness, your mind, it's a very different way of talking, is linked to all those winds. All your states of mind, your conceptual states of mind, are linked to these different wind energies. So when your Tibetan doctor feels your pulses, they can feel an imbalance of certain winds, and they know it's winds that are connected to energy, to attachment, or to anger, or to whatever. All the winds are connected to the different states of mind. So when you've got a lot of depression, they can detect that imbalance of the wind. So instead of getting your Prozac or something, which alters your chemical construction, you take your your herbal medicine, which will change that wind energy, which will help your depression mind calm down. So there's this intimate relationship between the mental and the physical. Okay, there. Then you go to very subtle consciousness, when John deconstructs all the way to the subtlest level before he leaves the body. This is called very subtle consciousness. Now this is inextricably linked to a very subtle wind energy, the subtlest of the four elements. And you can't separate these two. They're inextricably linked. And it's of the same nature as, but subtler, as the four elements of the external world. Because let's face it, your physical body is the external world, isn't it? It's the same nature as the rocks, the stones, the moon, the stars. It's all made of the four elements, okay? It happens to be this piece of physicality is conjoined with your consciousness, right? Okay, one way of talking. So we get to the very subtle level. And it happens to be that very subtle level of consciousness. It's kind of like that contains all the program of everything John has ever said and done and thought, and all the stuff he's brought with him from past lives. And so that's programmed already now to take on a new life. Okay, so that very subtle consciousness is linked with a very subtle wind. So now, the way when you take another rebirth, the four ways our karma ripens, remember? First is the type of rebirth. So let's say you've got the karma due to morality karma ripening before you stop breathing as John. A strong practice, your habit of morality ripens, it triggers a virtuous karmic imprint, which is the seed that will then program you to take another new life in a new human mummy, let's say in Sydney. He's a nice little Buddhist, who's very devoted, or it could be anywhere, but a good little Buddhist mummy, because you practice Buddhism, you want a nice Buddhist mummy, so you program yourself to get that. So you've got a nice mummy, and then because you've created a lot of virtue, you've got a good Buddhist mummy. Then because you've created a lot of generosity, you might get a nice rich mummy. So it enables you to be able to practice and be generous and do all sorts of things because you're a virtuous person. That's one of the consequences of karma. Because of your virtuous karma, you will have a very good environment. So environmental karma, one of the 4 ways our karma ripens, is the very way the physical world impacts upon us, the interdependence between us and the physical world. So morality karma, in your case, would ripen to be born into a really good physical environment where the wind element, where all the elements behave nicely, where the sun comes down and goes up at the right time, and the air is lovely, and the food is fresh, and the water's not polluted. That's in general the way we experience the external world. The very configuration of the elements out there is the result of the collective karma of the individuals who live there. So that's one way of talking about the relationship between minds and physical. So you get born in Sydney, let's say, or on a part of Sydney where it's very beautiful, leafy suburbs and lovely water and best this and nice beach and good food and fresh veggies and delicious water. That's not just some accident. That's the result of your virtue. And that those elements are all there, configured in that way due to very past ancient karma collectively by all you people who are being born there at this moment, experiencing that good environment. So the rocks, so if you're born due to, let's say, you might be born as a Buddhist, let's say you've got virtue, but one of your strong karmic results of, let's say, I forget what they all know, let's say abusive speech. No, not abusive speech. Let's say harsh, let's say disharmonious talk. Well, then you'd be born to a good family, maybe even rich, but to a really, like a war zone, where everything's broken and ugly and there's a lot of fear and paranoia around. That's environmental karma, where things broken and busted. Or let's say the result of a lot of attachment, strong sexual attachment. You might be a Buddhist, you might have good virtue, you might have a rich family, you might all have good results. But your environment, due to that particular karma ripening, will be like a yucky, smelly, yucky environment. So the way the environment is in general is the result of the karma of the sentient beings that live there. There's not an environment from its own side that's Mother Nature or God or somebody. That's one answer anyway. That's not the answer it's the question you asked, but that is a way of seeing the relationship we have with the environment. Do you understand what I'm saying? And then conjoined with the 4 elements. That's how they talk to you in this model. Yeah? Yeah?
And 4 elements. So they're naturally interdependent with
So what do you mean by that? So what do you mean by that? When you say they're naturally interdependent with each other, what do you mean by that?
For example, fire. The fire for the water. Fire.
Yeah, okay. This is just this is of course the interdependence, and the way they describe it in this text, I forget now, it's similar to how we would have, is all the elements contain elements of all 4 elements. In fire, there's a majority of fire, but why it moves is because it's air, and why it's this is because it's the water, and why it's that is because it's the earth. So just all the 4 elements is a description, isn't it, of the physical world, with the models we have in the West now. We don't talk about the 4 elements anymore. That's old-fashioned, They have another way of describing. So clearly they're interdependent, but it's just a way of describing them, isn't it? Of course they're interdependent. So the general meaning of interdependent, though, there's a multitude of meanings. I mean, the classic way of presenting interdependence is in terms of 2 truths, okay? We began on this yesterday. That things exist conventionally. And then that same thing, which is a cup and not a toilet, which is a cup and not a flower, which has a clear definition and a clear function, and as long as we all agree upon that and accept it and shake hands on it, then that's what a cup is, and we have to agree that's a cup. So then that is the conventional truth of a cup. Well, that very truth, the very cup, has also its ultimate nature, which is that it's completely empty of existing in and of itself as a cup. Okay, so interdependence means here at this level, there is a cup that does exist in dependence upon various factors. So the first level of the interdependence of the cup is that it comes into existence in dependence upon, in fact, countless causes and conditions. Countless. And if you started looking for the beginning of the causes and conditions of this cup, you won't find it. You'll get back to the first moment of this universe. But everything you posit is the result of a previous cause, which is the result of that cause. So I remember discussing this when I hearing the teachings from my philosophy teacher, Geshe Tekchop, when I first studied. And he used the example of the object called Robina. And he said, it can be said that everything in the universe up to the first moment of Robina is validly a cause and a condition for the existence of Robina. And once you start tracking back the cup, it's the same. So in that sense, interdependence in terms of cause and effect, cause and condition, is clear. So the logic here is, because we cling instinctively to an inherent cup, to a cup that isn't depending upon something. We don't think we do this, but this is a deep mistake in our mind. So thinking about how cup is the result of many causes and conditions, and how when you start to analyze those causes and conditions, you will not find among them a cup, because cup is nothing other than the culmination of all those causes and conditions. Therefore, cup is not existing from its own side. That's one way of thinking. The next one, the next level of interdependence, is that cup exists in dependence upon its parts. And you will not find any cup among those parts, because same logic, cup is nothing other than the coming together of the parts. So this is another, we can go into this a bit more, this is a subtler level of interdependence. And then the subtlest one of all is that cup exists in dependence upon mind, thoughts, concepts, naming it, calling it that. And that you won't find a cup apart from that. That's three levels at which things are interdependent. But there's so many more. You could say, and we'll go into these, let's help us understand emptiness. But we could say that short, what's short? It's completely a relative phenomenon dependent upon long. You can't possibly find short in and of itself. So short depends upon the existence of long in order to even exist. It's referential. You can't possibly, there's no inherent short. That's a really obvious level in which things are interdependent. Now, another general kind of touchy-feely way of interdependence is how everything works nice and harmoniously. Now, the Buddha would happen to say that's the result of virtue. How come we live in an environment that's nice and works nicely and doesn't erupt in the wrong times in the wrong place, which is lovely? When everything is working nicely according to their laws, that's because of our virtue. Why you're in a group of people who are all harmonious and everything's working interdependently. I listen to you, you listen to me, I forgive you, you forgive me. We don't fight. That's because we're practicing virtues, you know. There's that way of talking about how everything's interdependent. And then also the other way, the most radical, the long-term one, is as we get rid of this ignorance, this maripa, this ego grasping that clings primordially to the sense of an independent, separate, genuine, separate self, which is the consequence of this ignorance, which is the source of all suffering. When we rid our minds of this and cultivate amazing compassion, talk about interdependence, you will no longer have a sense of a separate self at all. You'll have a sense of utter connectedness to every living being as if they were you. So there's different ways of talking about interdependence. You see? You still look like you're puzzled. Good, okay. All right. Huh? Thought, yeah, right. That's right. It is the toughest one. That's the level of teaching that all the lamas teach at. This is the toughest one. It is indeed. These other two levels are all views of the Buddha, and we need to go step by step. But this is the subtlest one. But the tastiest way to let's talk about this right now, because this is something we really, this idea of emptiness, because of the way they talk and the whole culture of how it's presented, and we try to get our head around. Sometimes it's very confusing, but we don't even get to understand the way they present it, the language, the structure. You know? And so, okay, so different things here. All right. Emptiness. They talk about we've got to see emptiness. We need to cognize emptiness. They say once we've cognized emptiness, we've cut the root of samsara. suffering is, that's the root cause of samsara, all these words. So we've got to get our head around what that means if that's the case. So that's what we're heading for, you know. Okay, so there's various ways of talking about this. And all you've got to do is first, you've got to be intellectual first, so that's what talking about it means. Okay, so cognizing emptiness, what does that mean? You know? So the word is just abstract to us. So let's just use it in an ordinary way and get our head around, because it's not complicated. If I say my cup is empty, we know, because cups hold tea, but it means my cup has no tea in it. We know it means that. Empty, in other words, empty simply means there's no tea in my cup. So empty means not. Empty means not. The room is empty, we'll say. We know it's got full of furniture, but we mean it's empty of people. It's just how we talk. So the word actually simply does just mean not there. There's something not there. So because we're not used to this way of talking, which is coming from the time of the Buddha, that's carried on through the Asian traditions and kept very beautifully from the lineages of each of the masters, passing it on to the next, then it's really hard for us to unpack these concepts because we're not used to talking like this, you know. So, okay, the Buddha would say that every phenomenon that does exist, everything that does exist is empty of existing from its own side. That's how they talk. So let's look at what that means. Okay, so let's say you're colorblind and you think this is blue. It's possible. You can be colorblind. You see when you see this cup, you see a blue cup. Well, the normal way we'd say is, don't be ridiculous. Come on. Don't be ridiculous, Robina. It's not blue, we'd say. It's pink or whatever it is, you know. Well, another way of saying it, okay, yeah, that's one thing. Next thing, let's talk like this. Buddha would say, when you study Buddhist philosophy, you learn the various synonyms for that which exists. And this is a really crucial thing, because Buddha is saying that when we finally do cognize that which exists without mistake, that's liberation. Because right now, because of the lies in our mind, we are cognizing phenomena that simply don't exist. So when you look at a cake, there is a cake there. But the cake we see is not the cake that exists. If I've got attachment to cakes, then because of a lie called attachment, I've got my sunnies on, my attachment glasses on, the cake I see will be a divine, delicious cake that will make me happy when I eat it. That is the cake that I see and I believe exists, isn't it? If you vomit every time you eat chocolate cake, you'll see a disgusting, rotten cake that will make you sick. That's the cake you see. Well, in a simple, obvious way, we can see this is true, that we're not seeing the cake as it is. Whatever we think it means, what it is, but we're seeing a cake that we have made up. So this is what Buddha's saying across the board. We are seeing things incorrectly. We are seeing things that don't exist. There is a cake, there is a basis. But the cake we are seeing is not the cake as it is. If you hate pink people, the pink people that you see aren't the people that they are, really, because we're projecting our own junk on top of them. Well, here the projection we're talking about is the subtlest one, the subtlest lie, the deepest, most primordial lie called ignorance, ego grasping, that projects, and this is where it's abstract to us, a type of existence called inherent or intrinsic existence. Forget what that means for the moment. So basically, when we see something, we're seeing it wrongly. We're seeing it as inherent. We don't think we're seeing it as inherent, so never even mind what that means for the moment. So it's like if you're seeing, so the various synonyms of that which exists, one of them is the term existent. One is phenomenon, one is object, there are several. The definition of an existent is that which can be cognized by mind, a valid state of mind. So Buddha is wanting us to cognize that which exists. That which exists. So okay, do you agree? Another discussion now, forget the blue. Another discussion. Do you agree this, let's call it pink. Can you see this pink here? Would you agree this pink here? Okay. Yeah? Okay. So you agree pink does exist. So pink would be an existent, wouldn't it? Pink can be cognized by your mind. Do you agree? So pink is an existent. You accept that? All right. Now, blue does not exist here, does it? Would you agree with that? Would you agree with blue that there's no blue here? Okay, so let's turn that let's turn the there is no blue there into a noun, into an existence. It's called we could say it's non-blue, couldn't we? Would you agree that non-blue exists on this cup? Would you agree with that? So non-blue is a bit abstract, but it is an existence that our mind can cognize. Would you agree? A dog maybe couldn't, because you've got to have some bit of brain to work it out. You can deduce because it's pink, it's not blue. So instead of saying it's not blue, you turn it into a noun. You turn it into an existence, a phenomenon that your mind can cognize. Are you with me? So you can cognize pink, and you can cognize the non-blue here, can't you? Well, use what the term Buddha uses, the absence of blue, or the emptiness of blue. So would you agree that on this cup, there does exist the phenomenon called pink? You agree? Would you agree that on this cup, there does exist the emptiness of blue? Would you agree with that? So the emptiness of blue is a vivid phenomenon that does exist, isn't it? So he's turning this into a thing that can be cognized. Now, we don't know what inherent existence means. Not yet, maybe. But let's just say Buddha is accurate in saying that we think it's inherent. It's like we think it's blue, but it isn't. So would you agree then that on this cup there does exist the emptiness of inherent existence? It's like you made a mistake and you think it's inherent. We don't know we think it's inherent. We don't realize we make this mistake. We'll discuss that in a minute. But this is the whole idea. That what Buddha is saying is there is a cup that does exist. But the way I see it isn't correct. So he turns that into a cognizable phenomenon. So he says it is empty of being inherent. Just like saying it's empty of being blue. Blue is easy because we know what blue is. Inherent is more difficult. We can't get our head around that. But never mind. This is the way the phrases are put, how it's constructed. So there is existing on this cup the emptiness of a certain way that we think it exists, but which it doesn't. You understand? So you've got to get your head around that way of talking. That's what it means. You've got to cognize emptiness. It's a shorthand for saying we need to be able to see nakedly and see the truth, how this cup isn't the way we think it is. So the absence of things is a very big deal. It seems abstract, it seems nihilistic, but it really isn't. So let's use a couple of other little examples to get our head around the idea of absences of something, emptinesses of something, absences of something. Let's say you're running late and you've got your key drawer by the front door. That's where you keep your car keys. And your keys are always there. It's your key drawer, okay? And you're running late and you open the drawer. Oh! What do you think you saw in that drawer? Not nothing, no. Good. Emptiness of keys. Let's say I'd looked in the drawer, sticking my nose in your drawer, and I didn't expect keys, did I? I'd just go, what a boring old drawer, nothing there. That's why emptiness does not mean nothing. It's the absence of something really vivid and shocking because you believed it was there. So isn't that a shocking thing when you see there's no keys there? You actually vividly see the absence of keys, don't you? And the only person who would see the absence of keys is a person who thinks keys are there. You with me? So we all believe we are inherent. Never mind what it means yet. We believe utterly and have for eons that we're inherent. And all the mistakes of attachment, anger, pride, jealousy, wars and suffering and dramas and lives and this and that are the consequence of that lie. So finally, with our subtler mind through meditation and from years of hard work, finally seeing the absence of the inherent I is a stupendous transformation. And as Amazova says, there's two ways that you can respond when you really do see it, not just intellectually. We've got to know intellectually first, but when you really have an experience. The first one, which is immense fear. He says, great. Even better, more advanced, is immense joy. When you finally see the absence of the I we have always thought has been there since beginningless time. Are we communicating a bit here? So you've just got to get your head around the concepts. You've got to kind of squeeze your brain a bit and get used to it. And we're very good at all this. We're very intelligent. We can do this. You know, we can learn computers and everything. We can learn this. So we tend to be scared of it and don't know how to think about it. You know? But we just got to use our minds a bit and really think it through logically and get used to this way of talking. And then it's not complicated. It just takes time, I think. Are we communicating here? Yeah. because you realize there's this ridiculous thing that's been believing in this thing that's never existed, that's caused all your suffering and all your pain for eons. It's like, finally losing all the pain and all the suffering. You're blissing out. You can't believe it. How marvelous and beautiful. But now you've found happiness. Now you've found joy. Something like that. I mean, I can't imagine. I haven't seen it yet. So the absence of something is very vivid. The absence of something. Whereas one of the commonest misconceptions, is that we think that emptiness means nothingness. Emptiness means nothingness. But you can see it, a good example in the drawer. I would just see nothing in the drawer. But you see something really specific. That's, get used to that idea. Because the absence of the inherent I, that is to say, equals, shorthand, emptiness, is a vivid, vivid thing, not just some kind of abstract nothingness, which is the commonest way we think. And Buddhists talk, they say, oh, well, it's all empty anyway, it doesn't matter. That's exactly a mistake. That's the nihilistic one. That's interpreting it as there being nothing. And this is a deep mistake our minds run to. Buddha says that, these two truths, that things do exist conventionally as dependent arising. And they don't exist ultimately. They're empty of inherent existence. And these two, for us right now, as soon as we hear these, we have the two extreme views. We hear them wrongly. And these are the two extreme philosophical positions that our minds just instinctively take. And you could even say that the philosophical view of a creator and a soul is the expression of this extreme view called eternalism. Permanent, inherent, something there. And then you could say that the materialist world is the philosophical position of the nihilistic view. So the two extreme views are like this. As soon as we hear there is a cup that does exist conventionally in dependence upon this and this, instinctively we kind of, oh, thank goodness, there's something, grasp. We just over-exaggerated the cupness. We just eternalized it. See it as permanent, inherent. As soon as we hear there is no cup from its own side, in and of itself, intrinsically, inherently, as soon as we hear this, we run to the other extreme view of nihilism and say, oh, well, there's no cup. So we over-exaggerate the cupness and we under-exaggerate here. We chuck out the baby with the bathwater. And our mind instinctively runs between these two extremes. They're deep in our bones. And you could even again say, even just the emotional kind of depression mode is the nihilistic one. The overexcited attachment, wow, fantastic, amazing, marvelous, is the eternalistic one. And these are just these natural instincts we have right now. And they're wrong. They're mistaken. So it really is subtle, the work we have to do on our minds to get to see this. And the first step has to be getting the words right. Has to be. But that's not the point here, is it? What's the point there? Well, how does that help understand the absence of the inherent existence of the cup? So I'm lost completely. Tell me what you mean. Well, look, I forget that. Can we forget the non-blue here? Because that's throwing, it's kind of putting a fish in the works or something in the works, a spanner in the works. Here's a cup that isn't inherent or is inherent. Which one is it? What is this cup here? There's a cup. We label it a cup. We've got the definition. We agree it's a flat-bottom clay container that holds tea. We check there's no other valid cognition that contradicts that. And then it does function as holding your tea. So we all agree and shake on it that it is a cup conventionally. So then? So big deal. So what? So how does that help you realize the absence of inherent existence of the cup? Nothing to do with it. Not relevant. I don't think it's relevant. Yeah, that's the subtlest level of dependent arising, that it exists in dependence upon concepts and thoughts. So that's a different discussion now, so go on, discuss that. That's a different discussion, so go on. Well, that's the subtlest meaning of dependent arising. How everything, first of all, the first, in Buddha's teachings, okay, in terms of understanding how the self exists, because we can take the cup or the self. Okay, so let's look at the self. You know, self is just a word the Hindus use to refer to person. That's all. Person, self, being, I. They're all synonymous. A mind possessor, a sentient being. So, okay, they say, the first Buddha argues, they say there is a self. There is an inherent, pointable, findable essence of us that is permanent, that doesn't depend upon causes and conditions, which means it's permanent. That the second level, that doesn't depend upon the aggregates, which is the parts, the rest of the person, and finally, that does not exist. So these first two, okay. So the first school in Buddhist thinking, the Hinayana schools would say the gross selflessness, they would definitely say there is no self that exists that is permanent. The first understanding of interdependence is that there is definitely the absence of a permanent. There is definitely existing the absence of a self that doesn't depend upon causes and conditions. In other words, there cannot be a thing that exists that doesn't exist, an impermanent phenomenon that doesn't exist and depend upon causes and conditions. This is the first level of dependent arising, first level of selflessness, the gross selflessness. Then you've got a subtle level of selflessness, which is that there is no self apart from the aggregates. This is a very tasty one. We can really go into this one in more detail because this leads us to the third one. The more we get each of these, it leads us to each one. So this one is really interesting because look how we talk. We say, I have a nose. I am angry. I am depressed. I feel this. We talk like this. So we unpack this, what we mean by this, and we don't articulate it, is what we have to do, that we truly believe there's a bit of, like the aggregates. Buddha broke us down into 5 components, bits of body and bits of mind, okay? So let's say, we know we've got parts. We've got a bit of anger, a bit of love, a bit of jealousy, a bit of kindness. We've got a nose, a hand, an ear, a foot. We know that. So what we think, what we believe, how we talk, what we assume is that there's another part walking hand in hand called self, called I. We believe that. We speak like that. That's a lie. This is the second kind of dependent arising. This is the subtle selflessness of the lower school. This is a very tasty one, and this will lead us to the third one. So when we can start to doubt this, to look into this, and the only way to do it is to analyze it, to logically analyze it, how it just can't be true. We truly believe, there's like, a lot of the times lately I talk about how we've got all these roommates in our head. Love, kindness, attachment, jealousy. And our job, by being our own therapist, is to listen to all those thoughts that arise in our mind. All the roommates are your thoughts, basically. There are trillions of thoughts in there, all chatting away. And look at the subject of those thoughts. It's called I, isn't it? It's called I. Or me. And you did it to me, or I this, The subject of every one of those thoughts is I. And we just instinctively believe that there is a part, as well as the roommates. We think there's a landlord. The Buddha says there's no landlord, baby. You don't need one. All the bits and pieces of you work very nicely without there being a boss. That's why he says there's no creator. You don't need one. We don't need a landlord. We don't need a person to run the show. We don't need the puppeteer. We don't need the boss. But we think there is a boss. We think there is an I in there, apart from the love, the hate, the nose, the ear, the eye. We truly feel it primordially. This is a lie, he said. This is a lie. This is a lie. You can't find it. You won't find it. And this leads us, when we get clear about this one, this leads us to the subtlest one, which is, so the first one is that, the absence of something, that things exist in dependence upon causes and conditions. The second one is that things exist in dependence upon the parts. And the third one, the subtlest meaning of dependent arising, the actual meaning, the real meaning of the Buddha, is that everything exists in dependence upon thoughts and mind. Now, the prison example is a perfect one. The prison one is easier than the eye, because the eye feels so vivid. But prison, if it is true that prison does exist as a bad place in itself, that it doesn't depend on thoughts labeling it that, then my friend Mitch could never, ever, 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 ever be happy in prison. That's a fact. That proves that finally it's the mind labeling it as bad. Now, this is the point. We have to see there is no inherent bad prison, but there is conventionally a bad prison. And we see these as kind of conflict right now. So the more we think about how prison does exist at these different levels, there is a prison that does exist in dependence upon causes, in dependence upon parts, and indeed in dependence upon the mind labeling it this. But when we really can see the one of the mind, that's where the most freedom is. Because when we can see there is no prison from its own side, there is no prison in and of itself, there is no inherent, intrinsic, bad, ugly place. Conventionally, if you want to compare with a beautiful house in Turak, yes, prison is ugly. If you want to compare the lack of freedom conventionally with the freedom we've got, yes, it's horrible, conventionally. So and what Lama Tsongkhapa's way is so tasty. Right now we have these two extreme views. As soon as we hear there is no prison from its own side, we go, oh, well, there's no prison. Doesn't matter anyway. Complete mistake. That's chucking the baby out with the bathwater. That's not holistic. That's the wrong view of emptiness. So then as soon as we hear there is a prison that is ugly, it has chain fences, we go, oh, there is a prison. Grasp how depressing, kill myself. So what Tsongkhapa says we have to do, every time we hear there is a prison that does exist in dependence upon causes and conditions and this and that, we say that instead of grasping at it, we go towards the middle way. And then we say that means there is no prison from its own side. We force ourselves against grasping at it. And every time we say there is nothing from the side of a prison to make it a prison, there is no inherent prison. Instead of instinctively going, oh my God, thank goodness there's no prison after all. Don't say that means there is a dependent arising prison. So these two seem opposite. They're like the two extremes, As soon as we say it does exist as a prison, that means there's no prison. And as soon as you say there is no prison, it means there is a prison. It seems like brain splitting, but it gets us towards the middle way. Where finally, when we're a Buddha, we can see these two simultaneously because they're the same thing. They mean the same thing. Whereas now they're completely opposite, and we squeeze our brain together. Doing that kind of really brings the tension between the two and sees the relationship between the two. Because if something were existing without depending on anything, then it couldn't exist. Because whatever exists in the universe has to depend upon something for its existence, either cause and conditions, parts, or mind. The subtlest one, the most pure, the most profound, the real meaning of Buddha is that it finally exists. It comes from the mind. It is made by the mind. Everything exists like that. But as soon as we say that, we kind of think, which is the Western view, oh, well, it's only in the mind. It doesn't really matter. We actually have such an opposite view. We're so materialistic. We're so absolute and eternalistic, actually, if you think about it, that as soon as we hear it's in the mind, oh, well, it has no meaning. It's only in the mind, we'll say. Buddha's literally the opposite, the exact opposite. Enlightenment does not exist from its own side. There is no atom of enlightenment that exists without depending upon mind naming it, concepts calling it. But there is enlightenment that does function to benefit trillions of sentient beings. An enlightened mind does exist, but can manifest in trillions of forms throughout trillions of universes to benefit trillions of sentient beings for trillions of eons. It does function as this, but within the fact that it's empty of existing inheritance. If it were inherent, it couldn't exist. If it were inherent, it couldn't exist. If it did exist outside the mind, it could not exist. You have to think about it. That's obviously the point. There's nothing that exists that doesn't come from the mind. And if you think about it, if mind is beginningless, and there's only matter and there's mind, there's no creator. Well, where else do things come from? Think of it that way. If there's only mind, since beginningless time, there's minds having thoughts. Well, where the hell else do things come from but the mind? Where else would it come from? The elements, the sky, they come from minds. Everything's conceptually created. What's a cup? It's got elements. Go on. Okay, the second kind one, there's no I apart from the parts. That's fine. Life to life, yes. Very subtle consciousness, yeah. Yep, that's right. Nothing that, if anything does exist, it can't exist inherently. Just simply, it has to be, huh? Nothing does. Even very subtle consciousness, even enlightenment, nothing can. If it exists, it's empty of existing inheritance. If it exists, it can only be empty of existing inheritance. If it exists, it can only be a dependent arising. And if it's a dependent arising, it's empty. Dependent arising and emptiness, same meaning. Different way. Of what? Of what? No, okay. So where's the problem? Okay, let's keep looking. But you can't have a problem with its convention because you're holding it in your hand. You can't. You just drink your tea out of this thing. How can you say you have problems with it existing in the cup? With a cup. Okay, that means you have a nihilistic understanding of emptiness then. Because if you've got the right understanding of emptiness, it has to tell you that it's dependent arising, which means it does exist conventionally. It has to point that to you. So that means you've got the wrong understanding of emptiness. Because the right understanding of emptiness points to conventional truth. It tells you it does exist as a cup convention. So you've got to check your meaning of emptiness. Yeah. Actually, this is a perfect question. This is the whole point. Perfect question. Attachment is the result of believing in an inherent I. Because the irony of ego, believing in an inherent I, is that there's a sense of a separate I, a lonely I, a bereft I, a not fair I, a poor me I, an empty I. So what else is there but to crave to get something to fill it up? The final consequence, the final result that arises when you've got all the realizations, you've cut all the delusions, when you're omniscient, is there's no longer the thought, there's no longer the experience of subject-object. So this whole idea of being a separate self is the consequence of ego grasping. The irony of ego grasping is the stronger it is, The stronger we believe in inherent I, the more miserable, more bereft, more lonely, more empty, more fearful, more panic-stricken, more grasping to get something to fill me up. So when you finally annihilated when you see the absence of the fantasy I, then there's nothing to be attached to. It's gone like a dream. And therefore there can't be anger, because anger is a response when attachment doesn't get what it wants. All the delusions are on the basis. They're in this hierarchy of delusions. They're like the branches of the root, and the root is this ignorance that clings to the I. It's not initially evident, it's true. We can see it. No, of course. Uh-huh. Right. Well, that's perfect. That just proves it, because that shows there's no anger. You just proved you have no anger when you're realizing. So if you have no anger, that means you have no attachment. Because if you had attachment to the I, you'd be hurt by what they said. So the fact that you're not hurt when they say it proves you don't have attachment. You just gave it up. It will follow. What do you mean, then? So you're chucking the baby out with the bathwater now. You're becoming nihilistic. Everything, this is the thing, Buddha would say, that everything that does exist already is empty. Already. It's just that we don't see it. Already, the flowers right there in that little pot actually are dependent arising and emptiness together. Everything that does exist, the people, the things, the toilet, the this, the that, the good, the bad, they're already empty. It's just that we're as blind as bats and don't see it. So they function because they're empty, baby. A flower exists because it's empty, of not being independent, of not being frozen in space. It exists because it's empty, because it's a dependent arising. That's how come it can even exist. So they're all existing beautifully and harmoniously because they're empty. We just don't see it. So you're seeing emptiness just means you finally caught up with how the flower is. Oh, I see, it's empty. Oh, gosh. They're all going to just fine, thank you. What, darling? Of course they can. Not easy than we could if we didn't have the understanding. They're blissful, they're clear, they see the interdependence of everything. They're laughing, they're happy, they're having fun. They're going to have a perfectly fine conversation with us. Way ahead of the game. So they see how everything exists. So they have compassion, wisdom, no fear, no jealousy, no depression, no anxiety, no attachment, no anger, no grasping. They're blissful. They're sailing. They'll be tuned in everywhere, automatically. Things are empty whether we like it or not, because we can't see it. They exist because they're empty. And when you see it, you're just much more blissful. There isn't, once you see an emptiness, Lama's Opa says, it's very nice to hear this, there is no fear. Fear is gone. Because delusions are all rooted in fear, because we believe in the I. And that's the primordial instinct for survival. Buddha would have liked that phrase. That's the phrase that you get grasped with, believing in the inherent I. When you don't have inherent, when you don't believe, you no longer, when you see there is no longer the inherent I that you always thought there was, then you are laughing. There is no fear. There can't be. Lama Zopa, when he was a little boy, he was recognized when he was a little boy as the reincarnation of Kunsang Yeshi, one great Nyingma yogi up in the mountains, the Sherpa, you know. He was a layman, he was a secret meditator, like a lot of them, would go back and forth, you know, to Tibet, buying souls and things, support of the family. And then, like a lot of these people, the last years of his life, he found this little cave. Basically, it was like where they stored the radishes. He pulled the radishes out and moved in, you know. And it's called Laudo. He's known as the Laudo Lama. Laudo, I think, means radish or something. So I think he lived there the last 20 to 30 years of his life, meditating, great Nyingma yogi. So anyway, when he got old, they asked him if he'd start a school for the boys, meaning a monastery for the local kids. He said he was too old. He promised he'd do it in his next life. So anyway, he passed away as a great Tantric yogi with complete control over the process, like they came. And he finally, as a little boy, got born, is what they're saying, to his mummy, you know, his name. He wasn't called Zopa then, but never mind, let's call him Zopa. So he was just a little tiny boy. Since the mother said, from the time he could, as soon as she'd turn her back, she'd turn around and little Zopa's crawling up the hill, back to this cave. Okay, she doesn't know who he is, but he's crawling up to this cave all the time. No matter what she did, he's out the door, very relentless, you know. From the time he could talk, he's trudging up the little mountains to get to the cave. Come home, he'd say, no, that is my home, you know. So these little reincarnations, they say that they remember very vividly as their children. So they want to get back on and continue the job of meditating. So eventually she thought we better check the local lamas, and so they checked up and said, yes, it would seem he is the reincarnation of the Laudo Lama. And so anyway, when he was about 8, or little boy, they gave him over to the monastery, you know, he's given a manager. They're all very professional here, these reincarnated people. And so he's up in the mountain one time, way up in the mountain above where home was. I don't know where it is. And it was a big river, and he crossed the river. He sees these strange, pale skin, straw-coloured hair people, like, you know, Anglos. And he hasn't seen these pale people before, and he wants to meet them. So, of course, you don't go empty-handed, so he was determined to go with a little pot of potatoes to make an offering to these Anglos, these white, strange, pale people. So his manager didn't want him to go. There's this bridge, this little rickety bridge, you know, kind of a rope bridge, I think. So he's walking with his potatoes, and he falls in the river. And the way he tells the story is very nice. He said, the thought occurred to me, the person known as the Laudo Lama is about to die. And his mind's very clear, you know. And then he didn't even say I, he said the head was bobbing up and down, right, for air. And clearly they don't teach him swimming there, right, so he couldn't swim. And then his head pops up and sees the manager running along the bank, you know. So anyway, he said, I didn't know anything about emptiness. So I've got to extrapolate here. That means in that life, up till the age of 8, he'd had no teachings. We could deduce from what he's about to say, and from his whole response he has, that he has to have realized emptiness in the past, because, you know, this is his response. He said, I didn't know anything about emptiness, but there was no fear. So this is the point. If we can conceive of this, and we can imagine this, you know, with us now, because we have this strong grasping of this inherent I, we don't know we call it that. It's just deeply instinctive. In fact, the scientists call it instinct for survival, don't they? And we consider it totally necessary, appropriate, and reasonable. You know, that when you're attacked, insulted, hurt, this rises like a lion. You know, and panic comes. Complete panic. We just assume that's healthy and normal. Well, the Buddha calls that ego grasping. So when we're driving on the freeway, it's not rising. You're just driving along, feeling content, listening to the radio, and suddenly a car nearly crashes into you. Look what arises. It's like, oh my God, panic, fear, the heart beats, isn't it? That's the indicator of this grasping at the I. And when it's threatened, it rises. And so there's Lama Zopa drowning. Normally we'd think it's complete panic station, isn't it? Panic, fear, my God, you're palpitating, your heart going. And so then we think if he didn't have instinct for survival, he'd just sink to the bottom of the river and go, oh, well, I'll die. So therefore we assume you've got to have this fight for survival. But no, you don't. So clearly he was going up for air, which would look like he was panicking. But if there's no grasping of the I, the mind is completely clear. You're seeing exactly what's happening and you're dealing with it. There's no drama. There's no panic. There's no hysteria. You know, we can't conceive of this. We can't conceive of this. But this is what Buddha says. Fear is the consequence of this ego grasping, and all the other delusions are rooted in fear. Look at anger. Look at a person being angry. We just go, oh yeah, they're being angry. But look at them. They're literally having a mental breakdown, aren't they? They're having a complete panic attack. We just say, oh, they're angry. Then 5 minutes later they calm down. You know? It's a complete hysterical panic attack. The I is gone mad. Hysterical because it didn't get what it wanted. It's so obvious. Look at attachment, intense attachment. The desperate need to get that thing, as if you die and disappear if you don't. Animals have it 1 trillion times more powerful than we do. But look at humans. All rooted in fear. It's their nature. They're a nightmare. And they're all because of ego grasping. That's their root. When that's cut, of course there's no attachment to anger. Can't be. You're reasonable. and clear. You can also be very powerful and strong and appropriate and necessary. You behave according to whatever is needed, but it's not coming from ego, which is inconceivable to us. We don't have any reference points for this kind of thing in our materialist models at the moment. Very interesting. What, darling? According to whatever's in front of you, like a gunman's there, you deal with it. You don't just go, oh, well, shoot me, it's karma. You might punch him in the nose. It's not coming out of panic, though. It's not coming out of anger. It's coming out of kindness and appropriateness. You do whatever's necessary with wisdom. There's only wisdom now. There's no delusion. Wisdom is what you get when you rid the mind of delusion. Delusions cause you to panic and do the wrong thing and hysterical and exaggerate and do this and do that. Wacky, They make a mess. When there's no delusion, there's only virtue. There's only virtue and wisdom. There is only virtue and wisdom left. So whatever is needed, you'll do it. But well, if you didn't, how can you have wisdom? You're an idiot still. It's all this nonsense. It's all meaningless, isn't it? What? What? Yes. 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 Angry? No, of course not. Come on. No, it doesn't have to. No, it doesn't have to be. When you've got, listen, this is why we can't imagine not having attachment and anger. So I'm just trying to imagine you've got no attachment and no anger. Try and imagine it. What else would there be? There'd only be kindness. There'd only be clarity. There'd only be wisdom. There'd only be intelligence. There'd only be love and compassion. There would only be those. There is nothing else left. It's impossible for anything else to function. So if you're going to die, you die. If you can get out of the way, you might subdue the guy. But it's out of kindness, out of intelligence. You wouldn't sit there and go, oh, it's karma, there's no eye, so you can kill me. No. Vajrasattva was going up to get air, right? But his mind was crystal clear, observing what was happening and dealing with it. Because we assume instinct for survival is what we need. We think we're an idiot if we don't have instinct for survival. That's what the Western view says. But the Western view assumes the presence of these neuroses as absolute necessities. And this is something very interesting. There's quite a few kids these days you're discovering, Western kids who are considered reincarnations of previous lamas. There's quite a few around now. And what I'm seeing is, it's very interesting. There's two I can think of. One girl, since the time she could talk, okay, you don't have to believe all this, I'm just telling you. She's been recognized by the Dalai Lama and so on. So from the time she could talk, tiny girl, she would point to that Lama and tell her father, that's who I am. She's very clear. And she's been since recognized. She's about 14 now. Geshe Lama Konto. She's been connected with Lama Konto. There's his actual formal one, who's his boy, but she's this little blonde Scottish girl, So she's quite a remarkable girl. But because if she is a high being, okay, if she is what they say she is, that means she has no ego. That means she has no grasping, no I. No belief in the I, therefore no attachment, no anger, nothing like that. It would mean this, okay? Now, you can see with her, she's very humble, very quiet, very humble. There's another little girl I can think of similar who hasn't necessarily been recognized, but the lamas I know in Dharamsala treat her very specially. They give her special practices. She's quite an unusual little girl. She's painfully shy. Now she's considered autistic because she's maybe Asperger's, whatever. Borderline, because she's deeply shy. So therefore, because she doesn't jump in the middle and cry and think, give me my ball and shout and yell and then have a hug later, she's considered abnormal. I mean, it's a bit scary when you think of normal means jealous and attached, This other little girl, she doesn't have the usual skills, but she can learn them. Now, on the other side, some of the this little boy I know who's been recognized, he's a fierce little person, violent, fierce little boy. Super intelligent. He for sure has been called autistic. But he is the reincarnation of some yogi, with very unusual little mind, most unusual little powerful little being. So the normal ways we think of normal, I think it's a bit scary. Keep your kids out of the way, excuse me, I'm not trying to sound like Tom Cruise or anything, but you understand my point. What's normal, it's hard to know sometimes. We have these very pathetic views of normal. So a person doesn't have jealousy. They won't stamp and shout and yell in the middle of the schoolyard. They'll stand there quietly and maybe, just different behaviour. It's because a child who's highly advanced, the little boy is very fierce. Doesn't look like what we think a holy person is, but a very powerful mind that does need to be subdued, and he needs to be educated in a certain way. A lot of these little tulkus are very fierce. I met them. Lama Ursel, hang on. Lama Ursel was a reincarnation of Lama Yeshe. When he was little, I was taking care of him at the Theyre Institute. Were you around then? In 1885, and came to a couple of months. Remember Theyre Institute? And I was his cook. And I mean, anyway, Lama Yeshe is my Lama, so I have confidence in this. I don't know who his Lama Yeshe, but the Lamas say yes, so that'll do me, you know. So anyway, I was his cook. And he was this powerful little boy. He didn't speak, he was 2, but he was really powerful, but showed extraordinary kind of sensitivity. Like I remember Adele Halsey's little boy, he was 7 at the time, and he was having a tantrum. And there's little Lama Ursel, 2 years old, doesn't even talk. And there's, you know, little Ty is 7, I think, shouting and yelling. And so Lama Ursel, who's 2, kind of takes his hand like a grandfather and sort of subdues him, you know. But at the same time, he'd be really, Lama Yeshe was always quite rough with me. So Lama Ursel was exactly the same. He'd be rude to me. He'd say he didn't talk, but he knew yum yum meant food. I was his cook. Yum yum, he'd say. Yum yum. You know. I remember one time I had a blue jumper on. You're not supposed to wear blue. You're only supposed to wear the maroon. He wouldn't talk to me. So I put my red thing on, you know. Like, and then as he got older, he'd always refer to me as Annie. Annie's like, no. Annie nervous? This is when he was older and I was meant to be his boss. He would never do what I said. He'd say, oh, here comes Annie nervous. Why are you so nervous? You know? When he was 4, we took him for a meal in Delhi to the Hyatt, a fancy meal at the Hyatt, you know, a bunch of those monks and nuns. And he's sitting opposite from me. He's 4. And he looks at me with derision. And he goes, you eat too fast. You walk too fast. You talk too fast. You do everything too fast. And you can't help but joke because he's 4, you know. But, I mean, none of my lamas call me on my speed, just Lama Ursel. So it's hard to know who people are. So, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, any questions, students? 20 past 4. Let's just spend it today. Yeah, where are you? Go on. Yes. So you met the little boy. You what? Oh, you met her. Took them day check. Yeah, she's not the formal recognition. The formal recognition is this boy who was the son of one of the. Okay, Geshe-Lama Kontrok's attendant, Tenzin Zopa. He's got 6 brothers, and one of those kids had a baby. So he is the one who's been formally recognized. He lived in Kopan. I don't know where he is now. So he was the formal recognition. But this little girl was born a year before he passed away even. And this is not uncommon. Lama Zopa was reborn before the other one passed away. They can take a new birth when they feel like it. Now she's informally been recognized as the reincarnation, even though she's not the formal one. So you met her, yeah? Where did you meet her? Yeah, she was right there. Her. There you go. She's a very remarkable little girl. Most of the little boys I've met are wild, including Mother Ursula. She has always been completely subdued. So perfect behavior. And whenever she talks, I think they talk about the Buddhas, the holy beings having the power of speech. Whenever she talks, you just kind of have to listen. And she doesn't talk a lot. She's very humble, but a very unusual little girl. And, I mean, she lives, you know, the mother and father divorced, and the mother wanted to take her back to Estonia, but she decided, no, Mum, you're going to live in Glasgow, and I'll come and live with you, and I can spend time with you and Daddy. So she kind of runs the show a bit, you know. And she's several years ahead. She goes to regular school. She's 3 or 4 years ahead of her school. But this aspect of real humility is a remarkable little girl. Took some data. Huh? Who? Oh, his reincarnation. Where'd you meet him? Red Proper. Amaravati, where's that? Huh? Where? Oh, I see. He was there. I see. Okay. There's quite a few Westerns. There's a little girl now in Maine. She's maybe 13, you know. And since she's a tiny girl, Lama's overseas, she's very special. She's going to bring light to the world. I don't know what's going to happen with her, but when she was 8, her mother, before they met the Dharma, her mother took her to this sand mandala. You know, the monks had come to this sand mandala. And then she was just sitting there transfixed, watching every day. And then the abbot who was running the thing called her over and she joined in. And he said to the mother, I think she's remembering who she is, you know. So anyway, when they left, She was devastated, in tears for a month, beyond devastated, that she begged her to let her go because that's where she belonged, that kind of thing, you know. So I think she's becoming rebellious right now. She wanted to become a nun. Lama's obviously when she gets older, but now I think she's deciding she won't be a nun, so who knows. But she's a regular girl. It's very bright and sharp, but she seems to be somebody. This little girl in Scotland, another little girl in Israel, Atisha. There's little boys around, quite a few little boys. But seriously, in the West and Eastern time. Yeah, that was the article about Lama Ursel, and that was mainly about his friend. Sorry, gone. Yeah, Tulku, that's him. Yeah, and the other one was Lama Ursel. He's the former. Yeah, he wasn't featured in that story. Yeah, that's Goma Tulku. There's quite a few of the young lamas now. Kulu Lama. I mean, no, that Kagi Lama. What's his name? Kalu Rinpoche. He's disrobed. He's become, there's many of them now, young guys, there's a whole generation, 25 to 30-year-olds, all doing their own thing, becoming Western, adapting to this culture. Out of them. Sherrod Lama, he's still a monk. Huh? Is he? He's still a monk. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of them. Very interesting. Goma Tulku, he's wrapped. He came and saw Lama Zopa here last year, 2 years ago, when Lama Zopa was still here. Quite a few of them around. Yeah. No, I have no idea. No idea. Never heard of him. Oh, we're having a chatty day, aren't we? At 4:20? Yes, darling. Eyes a label, cup is a label, glasses is a label, kaka is a label, pee is a label. That's one of the. This is the one where the grosser level at which the way we grasp, and our language reiterates it. That there's an eye that owns the ears. There's an eye that has the anger. We think there's a little kind of little landlord in there running the show. This is not the subtlest meaning into this, but it's a really good one to get. Go on. Yeah, that's right. That's exactly the word. That's exactly. Okay, there is a tree. Okay, what's that called? What's the name of it? Okay, good. What's a cup? No, everything's that. What's the definition? Okay, we've got to give a definition, don't we? Let's just, in general, let's establish how things exist conventionally first. So, what's a cup, Mummy? Well, darling, it's that flat-bottomed clay container with a handle. That tells you its conventional characteristics, wouldn't you agree? But I don't know what it is yet. What does it do? Oh, sweetie, it holds my tea. So first we establish the definition, the name and the definition. But that's not enough to prove it's a cup yet. We've got to make sure it does fulfill its function. So I pour the tea, and if it does hold it, we agree it does fulfill the function. You see? You've got to have that. That's really important. Then we've got to really make sure that there's no other valid cognition in another mind that contradicts that. And once we've established this, then we can comfortably say this, conventionally speaking, is a cup, does function as a cup. Now that's conventional. Now, right there, this actually is proving that it comes from the mind. Right there, it proves it. But we're not happy with that. We then are imposing upon that flat-bottomed clay container that holds tea, that does in fact hold tea, but we impose on it more cupness than there really is. We over-exaggerate the cupness. We don't know we do, but this is what we do. So exactly the same discussion of the self. So there is a self. What's your name? Who? Mark. Okay. I keep forgetting Australian accent. It's so strange. Yeah, I know. I went to this movie on Australia. Did you ever see that Australian movie called The Bra Boys? You did. Well, my friends in America decided they'd distribute it there. This bunch of kind of whatever, doesn't matter. And so they had an opening of it in Hollywood on Sunset, and they hired a movie, and I went down to LA and went to the opening. There were 2,000 people there, and they had subtitles. Well, excuse me, I needed the subtitles. I couldn't understand his Australian accent. I had my American ears been sort of attuned, you know. So Mark, okay, Mark. It's not Mark. Oh, there you go. Okay, there you go. How interesting. There you go. So anyway, Mark. Okay, Mark, listen. So Mark also exists conventionally. Mark is the label we give to this part. So we can define you as this Australian, you know, Australian, how will we define a person? I don't know. There's a set of aggregates, a mind possessor that's named Mark. Good enough, you know, with a beard and with a hat and that mother and that father, whatever. So that Mark, just like the cup, does exist conventionally, does function, does go here, goes there, goes to the toilet, goes to sleep, gets up, goes to work, did this, did that, was born from this mother. But the trouble is, we hear those words. This is what Buddha says. We hear there is Mark. But what we do is we put more Mark onto Mark than there really is. And we can't see the difference. Because the very fact that what's a cup, that it's a convention that we have all agreed upon, but we think there's a cup from on high. This is what it means by seeing it as inherent. We think that the cup that somehow is from on high, that is in itself a cup. That's when you talk about an action called killing. Killing is exactly the same. It is a conventional truth, like Mark, like cup. You label it and you define it. Labeling, killing is taking the life, let's say, of a human being. So then we say, within the convention of virtue and non-virtue, what is that? Oh, that's a non-virtue. Now, the way we think in the world is we think killing is bad. Why is it bad? Oh, it just is, we'll say. It just is. That phrase means we think it's inherently bad. The way, pardon? No, that's the different. It's not the issue here, though. That's another discussion. Not the discussion here. Okay. So, killing, relatively, conventionally, is bad. It does function to harm a sentient being. You agree? Like the cup does function to hold tea. You understand? So, killing, you tick it. Is it taking a human life? Is it a bad action? Yes, it is. Why is it bad? Because people don't like getting killed. It hurts them. So that's how it fits the definition of being a bad action. But it's not an inherently bad action. And how we looked at this very simply was we looked at the motivation. You know, Jotara, I'm going to call you Yoyoba or something. Jotara, she did kill a mouse. I did kill a mouse. But Jotara didn't create negative karma because she meant to help the mouse. So right there, one piece of the puzzle, one piece of the dependent arisings, one of the pieces of the whole scenario was different. So that one piece is different, so the whole thing changes. The mouse still suffered. But when she did it, it was not a negative action. That proves killing is not inherently bad. But as soon as we hear it, we go, oh, well, it must be okay to kill, because we can't hear it subtly enough. We hear it as it's sort of like, oh, therefore it doesn't matter. But that's not the right conclusion. It's quite a subtle point. And we've got to do masses of thinking and analysing and meditating and purifying to have the penny drop, you know. But the necessary step is the words. Got to get the words right. I can't stress that enough. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. No, it's not what I'm saying. That sounds not wrong, but it's not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is, in this particular example of a phenomenon that does exist called killing, as soon as you change one of the... Okay, would you agree that killing is a dependent arising? Okay, would you agree that killing is a phenomenon that does exist? So all phenomena that do exist are impermanent. So it's got many parts. Would you agree? It's got many parts. There's a sentient being who doesn't want to get killed. There's Robina who wants to kill. Yeah? Then Robina picks up the knife and goes kill. There's many parts there, aren't there? So let's look at the one part called motivation. In my case, the motivation is a wish to harm. So mine fits the definition perfectly of a bad action when I do it because I want to harm. She doesn't want to harm. She wants to help, but she's mistaken in thinking that killing it will help it. But her action, the mouse did die. It was labelled an action of killing, but in her case, it's not a bad action because she meant to help it. So one component changed. So, for example, this is a cup, you agree? Take away the bottom piece. The whole thing's changed, isn't it? No longer a cup, is it? Right there. Right there. It can't be inherent. If it were inherent, you couldn't pull away that piece. It would always be a cup, no matter what you do. Not possible. So there is a mark. There is a self. But we think there's a self that's separate from all the bits that runs the show. There's a little kind of mini mark. We think there's a little mini mark in there. You know? You won't find that one. A mini me, that's right. We think there's a little mini me in there. And that's how we talk. That's how we talk. You said this to me. You offended me. You nearly fall off a mountain, as the Bonker Room says. You don't say, oh, my body nearly fell over the mountain. You say, I nearly fell over the mountain. Not my mind nearly fell over the mountain. My body. Like there's an owner and there's a body. Can't be sensible. But you've got to analyse that. Yeah. What, darling? What? Yep. Sure. Yes. But it's good though, isn't it? But we need it, don't we? We do. I think we do because we all hate ourselves. So speaking conventionally, we think we're a creep. That's a function of ego grasping. So we have to stop thinking we're a creep because we're not. Conventionally speaking. Conventionally. So it's almost like you can't begin to understand no self until you've got a decent sense of self. You know, you get a person who's a victim who hates herself. Start telling her there's no self. She'll just go kill herself. Because you already think she's a creep. She's not ready for emptiness. You've got to grow yourself and have a proper sense of accountability and karma first, and a strong sense of accountability. Then you can begin to see emptiness. It's too advanced. It's miserable. You understand? You've got to build up the person's self almost. So we do need it. We're all so pathetic. Yeah. No, junior school is abiding by the laws of karma. Junior school work is thinking about impermanence, and I haven't done the next two, and then you abide by the laws of karma. That's the fundamental meaning of the actual work in junior school. You abide by the laws of karma. You control your body, speech, and you begin to control your mind. The actual work of what we're talking here, understanding the nature of mind and delusions and virtue, that's high school work. So we do a bit of everything every day, you know. Every time you're loving, you're doing university work. Every time you say a mantra, you're doing tantra work. So we're doing them all according to our level, but they belong in different levels, you know, for teaching. It's really good to know that. It's important. You understand? And emptiness actually does belong into high school, but it's in the Mahayana, it's taught in the context of university because it's combined with those two things. All right. So, in order to really understand, you know, the highest practices, you know, Tantra, seeing yourself as a Buddha, emptiness is absolutely fundamental. It's impossible without understanding emptiness, without having a grounding in emptiness. There's no inherent I. Because if there were an inherent I, it's absurd to think of you visualizing yourself as this green lady, you know, becoming Tara. What a joke. Sounds like some kind of cosmic joke. We have to understand what it means. There is no inherent I. Okay, I think it's helpful too to look at just the experiential consequences every day of grasping at the inherent I, which is all the misery of daily life. They're the consequences. Having strong attachment to get what I want. Anger and freak out, or jealous or depressed or guilty when things go wrong. These are all the consequences. All the normal misery of daily life, the unhappiness, the depression, the anxiety, the worries, the fears, the anxiety, all the junk of daily life. These are the consequences of ego grasping. The stronger the ego grasping, the more the suffering, necessarily, just necessarily. The definition of being in samsara is grasping at the eye and then all the other consequences. Once you've cut the grasping at eye, you're out of samsara. You've got way to go yet before you finish, but you're no longer, you could say, well, you're no longer, you can call yourself a superior being. From the first second you've got this first non-conceptual insight into emptiness. You could say like that. More work to do, but you can't go back after that. Buddha says we've had countless realizations over countless lives. We've had single point of concentration countless lives. We've been able to fly in the sky and do amazing things with amazing powers countless lives. We've never realized something. Once you realize emptiness directly, direct insight, you begin the cutting of the root. You can't fall back. You can only go forward. It's a pretty crucial stepping stone. But all the work, everything in Buddha's teachings, and all this lam rim, junior school, high school, the rest, it all leads us, the way the lam rim is presented, like I said, if you're just doing high school, if you're a Theravada practitioner, you do this junior school and high school. And then the second scope, the high school, is where you start to meditate, you start to go into the mind, and eventually you realize emptiness. That's when you liberate yourself from samsara and you no longer need to be reborn. When you've done it finally, you're cooked, you're finished, you're out, you're gone. But the way the Mahayana presents it, it's taught in the context of the six perfections of the Bodhisattva because it's to be combined with bodhicitta, which makes it more powerful. So it's the final point in the entire Lam Rim. It's the end, the last of the six perfections, which is the final stages of university. So everything else up until then is leading you to emptiness. Emptiness is implied in every one of Buddha's teachings. Everything in all the teachings is geared to emptiness, is leading us to that, is heading us to that. That's what we have to finally realize. And there, combining it with bodhicitta, because that's Buddhahood. So by looking at our minds, by looking at karma, right there, junior school, karma is actually an example of the first level of dependent arising, which is that things come into existence in dependence upon causes and conditions. And the thing we're talking about here is I. I exist. My life exists. My suffering occurs. My happiness occurs as a result of many causes and conditions done by me in the past. So thinking about karma is an amazing way to think about dependent arising in relation to I. So it's leading you to understand emptiness. Because if you're thinking about dependent arising, it lessens the grasping at this I hugely. The more we think about emptiness, the more we lessen the grasping at the I. Inevitably, inexorably, because it's dependent arising. There's no question. Why we grasp so strongly at the I now, as Lama Yeshe puts it so beautifully, there's ego grasping, this colloquial term used to refer to ignorance, the mistaken state of mind that grasps at the inherent I. As Lama Yeshe calls it, it's the self-pity me. It's a perfect way to put it. You look at your daily suffering. It's all about me. Poor me, not fair me, badly done by me, done to me, lonely me, unhappy me, fat me, thin me, depressed me. The only time we ever think anything good about me is in a defensive kind of hurt way. Well, I'm better than they really think I am. We never have really healthy, virtuous thoughts about ourselves. No way. You understand? It's always because we're nuts. What? Sweetie pie sounds too advanced for me. Can you start again? No. Because? Well, this is what makes it most difficult. This, of course, is what makes it most difficult. We are living. This is all pervasive suffering. The first level of suffering is that the bad things happen. the suffering of suffering, which is the result of having harmed others in the past. The second kind of suffering is a result of attachment, which is when we get the nice things, and we grasp like vampires at that. The third kind of suffering is the result of ignorance, ego grasping, which is because of this being born in the first place in a body. Actually, I like to refer to it as attachment. This is the way I like to think about all pervasive suffering. The first kind of suffering is when you don't get the junk, so it's like a nightmare. The second kind of suffering is when you get the junk and you think it's happiness. The third kind of suffering is being born in a body with the mind of a junkie. And the world you live in is constructed of junk. So in order to survive, you have to ingest it. No choice. That's all pervasive suffering. You're locked into suffering. Samsara is in the nature of suffering. It's like we're all born as junkies in a world made of junk, and you have to survive, you've got to eat junk. It is very hard to get past it. You're absolutely right. Well, I mean, whatever. It's hard, but it's a mental thing. The only way you can do it is, and of course, you know, because we're all, and this is a part of the problem with attachment, okay? The first level of attachment is attachment to the gross objects, to the sense objects, and that's where we start to control our body and speech, so we calm that down a bit if we can. But when we learn in the Mahayana part, in the university level, and they talk about attachment at the subtler level, it's as scary as hell. The main attachment we have is this desperate craving, and this is because of ego grasping, because of a separate sense of self. The main attachment we have is attachment to be seen by others, to be affirmed by others, to be approved of by others. It's almost like this depth of attachment, we don't even know we exist until others say, "Hello, Robina, you're a nice person." And everything we do is determined by this one. Everything we do is to desperately get affirmation, confirmation. And that's why we get lonely. You don't have anyone to tell your thoughts to. Because what do you think you get lonely for? Because you don't think you're worthwhile unless someone else is listening to you. It's bizarre if you think about it. Do you understand? This is so primordial, where every moment in the mind, we're watching what other people think of us. Driving the car. Why we get worried when you're driving the car is because the guy behind you, you think he thinks you're horrible. We can't cope with it. Shyness is what you're nervous about what other people think of you. If you're living in a house with people, you're all the time referring to what they're thinking about you, what they're thinking. If I'm doing this, I should think this. We don't have any proper independent thoughts. Everything is in reference to others. It is scary. Because why? Because this is how deep our attachment is. We don't even think we're real until someone else is smiling at us, talking to us. What do you think success means in this world? By definition, someone else thinks you're good. So, of course, you've got to go to the mountain to get out of the way of all these opinions, because it's very hard to find our real sense of self. It's really hard to give up this attachment. Forget about realizing emptiness. Ooh, it's really outrageous. This is how deep attachment goes. Yeah. No, half the time it's because we're just selfish. That could also be a sign of selfishness. They're having no conscience and don't care. That's not necessarily the same thing. It's only a person who's got a really profound, accurate sense of their self, which means they're genuinely kind, they're not self-cherishing, they're not selfish, they're loving and compassionate. That person is the one who's not attached to what people think. So if this person we're talking about is really loving and kind and generous and compassionate, then you can say what they're not caring what people think about it. Otherwise, it's just a delusion. It's self-centered. You see what I'm getting at here? Some people have less worry about what people think, or don't have so much need to be approved of every minute. That's probably true. We did look at that, you know. Huh? Sorry? If you are. If. Well, put it that way, if that makes sense to you. It's up to you. That's good if that works in your mind, that's great. But this attack, the way they talk about it in the Mahayana, is this weird phrase they have, the 8 worldly dharmas, or the 8 mundane concerns. It's 8 subtler ways, deep primordial ways that attachment works. So in other words, it's at the level of assumption. We have this deep assumption that that happiness is having good feelings. So we're junkies for good feelings. The millisecond you get a bad feeling, you're miserable. But there's no happiness. But this is the deep assumption of attachment. This deep assumption that hearing your name said nicely, praise, crave it desperately, that's happiness. And when you hear bad words about you, that's suffering. The absolute assumption that being approved of, having a good reputation is happiness, and that having a bad reputation is suffering. And the deep assumption that getting nice things is happiness, and that not getting things is suffering. These are all lies, and this deeper, more radical level of ripping out attachment is related to these. So this is where it seems utterly contradictory to normal life. You learn to be happy when things go wrong. You learn to be happy when you don't get things. You learn to be happy when people insult you. You learn to be happy when people think you're a horrible person and blame you. It's the opposite to normal. And this is the really subtler level, the deeper, more profound level, the way of smashing self-cherishing. So difficult. Outrageous. This is why they talk about the great yogis going up to the mountains. They say, you know, the really ideal yogi would go to the mountains. And Geshe Lama this amazing Lama, the Scottish girl, was one of his reincarnations. He went off after 59, went to Nepal and disappeared, you know, up into the mountains. He'd already trained for years. And he lived up there, way up in 6 foot of snow in the winter, and in a cave, a little hole in the wall, one of Milarepa's old caves, the cave of the doves. And eventually he got used to not having clothes. He didn't have clothes, he didn't eat, he didn't drink, and maybe he drank water, I don't know. And he didn't sleep. He didn't need to. He was a great yogi. Lived in Vajrayogini's pure land, as Amazoka says. And so these yogis, they're so fierce. I mean, the world would call them completely abnormal. They call them mentally ill, deeply mentally ill. They'd lock him up and put him in chains. Everything he showed was the opposite to what we think is normal. In other words, the moment he was up, they want to be on their own. They crave to be on their own. Not crave. They want to be on their own because the only way to go deep into your mind is to be undisturbed by all the things in the world. You know? So there he was, naked, didn't eat anything, didn't sleep, living in bliss. So that what happened was, it was sort of hilarious actually, when he first had to move from his cave after about the first 6 years, because these what do you call, you know, not Sherpas, it was way up in the corner of Tibet, up the top there near Nepal, near Tibet. You know, the people, herdsmen, with their yaks, coming further up the mountain for grazing for their yaks, you know, they're always looking for grazing. And so they go right up here and they see in the distance this weird looking fellow, long beard, naked, you know, they think he's a yeti, they're a bit superstitious. So they don't like him, so they chuck rocks at him, you know. Well, he doesn't argue, he's gone in a flash of lightning. He's got, all he had with him from Tibet was a few texts from all the different traditions. So he picks up his text, he's naked, and because he's already got realizations, and he can manipulate the energy of the external world because he can already manipulate his own internal energies. That's how come he can stay warm in 6 foot of snow with no clothes. He flies above the ground. You know, so he whizzes off, and he needs to get the hell out because he wants to be on his own. So they even say, some of the lamas say you need to be dark. You need to go to a cave, not only have other people not see you, but don't see other people either. That's the best way to do retreat because you truly have no place to go to your own mind. Truly have no place to go to your own mind, you know, and that's really intense, absolutely abnormal, bizarre behaviour. There's no reference point for anything remotely like this in our culture. You just be wacky, you know, because our understanding of what a being is in the world is a person with masses of attachment and neediness for other people. That we are in our nature social beings who need approval and love. That's what we say. So as soon as you display behaviour that's not like that, you're weird. You're autistic, you know. There can be some who are indeed. I'm not saying people aren't mentally ill. People who are deeply suffering, who are locked in themselves, who are paranoid, who are psychotic. There's no question about that. But a person who's like a yogi could look like psychotic, you know. Weird behaviour. So what I'm meaning is gone beyond all the attachment to reputation, attachment to what people think, attachment to clothing, all the rest. So why? So we can get into the mind to the deepest level and rip out the nonsense, become the Buddha, you know. I know. That's right, I know. Yeah, generations go fast. You did. Well done. You what? Well, he loved his Coca-Cola, I know. He loved his Coca-Cola. I know, yeah. I know, there's so many amazing stories. He's outrageous. There's so many outrageous stories about him. He's incredible. There you go. Tenzin Palmo. Yeah, English nun. He runs a nunnery whack in his mouth somewhere. Yes, he's a special person. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so attachment to all this nonsense. Attachment to reputation, attachment to all the things, you know. What about it? What about it? Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah, so the assumption is if you're a high being, you don't enjoy a drink or something? Why should enjoying a Coca-Cola be attachment? This is the point, isn't it? So in other words, we have to distinguish between attachment and, I mean, simply like something. Yeah. Attachment, you see, that's the thing. We don't see the difference between attachment and liking something. Attachment and enjoying something. So this is why when we hear mistakenly the teachings about attachment, it makes us very depressed. As Lama Zopa said one time, when we hear that the Buddha says we have to give up attachments, we think, oh, I've got to give up my heart, I've got to give up my happiness, because we don't even distinguish between joy and attachment. We assume, or like we don't distinguish between loving somebody and attached to somebody. We can't see the difference in our mind. And there is a difference, profoundly. And it's very hard to separate. Well, we've got it down, of course. So he's on the contrary. Can happily enjoy his Coca-Cola, but he's completely blissful without his Coca-Cola. He couldn't care less. You see? Yeah. Because if it is attachment, he's not a high being. Clearly, it's not possible. So he'd be rotten liar. Yeah. What do you mean? Okay. So we get junior school and we get to karma. Then we go to high school and we get to understanding the mind. In high school, in the mind, we really get to study Buddhist psychology very precisely. This model of the mind, where he distinguishes between negative states of mind that are the cause of all suffering, rooted in the ego grasping, and the positive states of mind that are at the core of our being and are who we really are and what we're trying to fully develop, right? So the job of being our own therapist is to distinguish these states of mind. That's how we make fundamental changes in ourselves. So why you want to do that is renunciation. So in the first level of practice in junior school, you've learned about karma, that everything you say and do and think produces your experiences. And then when we look at negative states of mind, what they produce is suffering. And what positive states of mind produce is happiness. So on the most simple level, ask any human being, ask any sentient being, would you rather have suffering or happiness? However we define it, we know we want happiness. So Buddha says, perfect, go for it, baby. Here's your method. First, control your body and speech. Stop harming others. First level, control yourself, because at least you don't sow more seeds. Now you're more controlled. You go to high school. Now you can get to the root of the problem, the actual causes of suffering, which are the delusions. And you've got to do that in meditation, as well as your daily life. So renunciation is a combination of one, being sick of suffering, fed up to the teeth with suffering, and you now know why you're suffering, which is your karma and your delusions. So the conclusion is therefore stop harming others and get rid of the delusions. That's because you've got renunciation. You're renouncing suffering and its causes. Attachment is the day-to-day, is the main voice of ego grasping, and is the day-to-day cause of most of our suffering, the craving to get what this I wants. So the consequence of renunciation is you give up attachment, you give up anger, you give up jealousy, and of course you give up doing the things to others on the basis of those, because they're the cause of suffering. So that's what renunciation is, when you see that. Do you see what I'm saying? just the way they use the word, we should get our definitions to. Listen, I think you better have a break, isn't it? 5 o'clock. Dinner's at 6. We do some meditation, don't you? You come, have a 15-minute break and then come back. 20-minute break, fine. But I'll have a break. I've been driving since 9:15.